in this document. I'll highlight those today during the presentation. But generally, there's resources that I've created that reinforce the points I've made. When it comes to compete, there are so many different angles to attack here. And I'm going to try to highlight some what I call talk tracks for you all today to help you when these conversations come up. I actually get to work with our competitive lab engineering team, so we've got some deep dive stuff if you need to get to it. But today I'm going to try to give you, 10 core messages that will help you, especially when it comes to competing against a challenging competitor like Microsoft. The first thing I always reinforce to folks when we talk about competition is respect the competition. I used to sell Microsoft. I used to sell other competing products. And I feel the more I understand, the more you, appreciate the challenge that the competitor gives you, the better everybody's going to be. Never go in and say, oh, yeah, Microsoft, oh, they stink. They don't stink. They're a challenge. But there are aspects to a decision that I think are important to reinforce with your customers about risks or changes, or often we call it FUD. When they say something and we don't do it, or they try to position us as inferior, you might call it FUD. But to me, those are opportunities to address that and then bring the conversation back to VMware. So I love competition because it really helps everyone stay on their game. But I know in your sales motions, it can often slow down your deals. So let me see if I can help you guys today identify some talking tracks. As always with a presentation like this, I'm going to cover a lot. And so don't be overwhelmed. Try to identify the 2 or 3 main points that you might want to start with, and then come back and kind of grab the rest, or drop me some questions if you have so many points of clarity that you need. But when it comes to your sales motion, the advice I always give folks, first and foremost, focus on the business impact of VMware to your customers. That's TCO questions, but questions like why and what go very far, and starting to, understand the business driver for the decision. A lot of our competition starts their conversations with, look what I can do. Here's the stuff I can do. And that's a little backwards. So for me, starting with, well, why are you doing this? What are the drivers? What's going on that I should understand? Because I can wrap what I do around those business impacts, those business challenges. And when I do that, the second point is that once I identify that, I can reinforce the specific VMware products, features, solutions, differentiators that have that real impact to your customer's business. So, that's the progression that I've seen be very successful. And then for you guys as partners, if you're not looking at value plays and power plays, I encourage you guys, check those out, bookmark those. They will help you sell and position. And power plays are, absolutely affecting the transaction. They give you extra discounts and incentives. So these are the things that, at a high level, make sure you're aware of. So as we start from staying at a high level, before we go into the specific points, some general strategy against Microsoft that I generally say, hey, you should at least be doing this stuff, right? Know the Microsoft enterprise agreement timelines and TCO shortcomings. Know when things like the the EA are up for renewal. Those are the times when Microsoft will often get aggressive with incentives or short-term promotions to help customers renew their EA. But it's also time for you to go in and kind of tee up the conversation of, hey, there are some things that you should know about before you commit to an EA, especially some things from Microsoft and some things that VMware is doing. And then the second thing is, if you haven't seen our One Cloud messaging, which really is that combination of the on-prem and cloud story and the portfolio of products around that, which I'll touch on today. But if you haven't gotten comfort with this, I encourage you, master this message. And I'll explain why in a little bit, but this is one of the best differentiators you can focus on with your customers these days. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute too. And then speaking of that, I encourage folks, call higher than the VMware infrastructure, the virtual infrastructure admin. Up-level your conversations. Remember, talking to line of business, what's going on with the business, what are the initiatives, what are the challenges. The more you can get in front of those folks, the better that you can position the overall strategy about VMware. And speaking of that, in my role, I get involved in partner stuff. I get involved in deals with customers. So often, a couple of us on our team that have the experience will be called into certain deals that are perhaps getting challenging, or we need to kind of do a competitive landscape overview. So I'm in front of customers all the time, even still now on my role. And the value you have coming in and being able to talk to an executive level, a C-level, a business leader, and say, let me explain to you the business impact, the vision of VMware, because so many of our customers often don't understand everything that we do. So again, this all kind of comes together. And then just getting into things like Protect Test Dev, make sure you guys are understanding of some of the newer things like, what vSAN does, what vSphere Robo Edition does for remote office, branch office. Little things like that help kind of, push away entry points of what I call least resistance from competitors like Microsoft into your customer base. So some high-level stuff. But as we get started, first point here, we think about SDDC. Let me just build this out there. To me, SDDC is one of our best differentiators when it comes to the vision of what the workloads do and what they need these days. And you think about SDDC, one of the best ways you can position it is talk to your customers about what it means when you add the next VM. When your customers add the next VM to their infrastructure, with the SDDC, they automatically have access to all the things you see here, right? Beyond virtual compute, networking and storage virtualization capabilities are built into our hypervisor. You've got native HA and load balancing. You've got backup and application capabilities already included with our hypervisor, with VDP. You've got security and firewall and VPN and routing and fault tolerance. Those are all capabilities that are natively available to that virtual machine. And they think about, not only when you add them at VM, where does that VM ultimately need to go? Whether it's on-prem or cloud, these are capabilities that will follow that virtual machine wherever your customers put that. Because that's significant. Because you think about the Microsoft approach to virtualization, it's just not as cohesive. And this is a point of differentiation here, because the ecosystem of technology around Hyper-V and their VM is a bit more manual still. Most customers have to typically configure storage, network, and security settings outside of the VM. And that's the piece that starts to fall apart when you compare their virtual machine to ours, especially when you think about where will your customers ultimately put that VM. And they're going to probably say, well, I don't know, maybe on-prem, maybe in the cloud. Perfect, because when they decide to do that, they don't have to rewrite the security and network and storage policies when that VM suddenly moves from one infrastructure location to another. So that's a big deal here. So I encourage you, make sure you're comfortable with this SDDC message, right? The whole idea that everything is defined in software, that you've got compute, networking, and storage defined in software, very tied to the VM with this great layer of management. It lets the control of that data center happen via software, and it really makes moving that VM wherever your customers want it a lot more seamless. So I think you guys have seen this. We kind of refer to this as the foundation for the unified hybrid cloud. This is a great conversation to kind of lay out with customers from a high level to say, this is the vision of VMware. VMware is all about giving you the flexibility of where you want to put your workloads and then where you want to move them. If you have customers that say, I don't want to be in the infrastructure server hardware business anymore, I just want to put my workloads where I want, great. But we can give you the flexibility, especially in this interim, to move the workloads where you see fit. And so if you go to VMware.com/cloud, there's a bunch of great collateral and videos that you can use that you point your customers to that really showcase this vision and strategy that VMware is focused on these days around the unified hybrid cloud. And it really is a unique approach for customers looking to embrace the flexibility of both sides of that story. It's a great point. So to me, point number 2, this is often where I lead before getting into SDDC, but I think SDDC, understanding that before you get into this, is strong. But when you think about one of our biggest differentiators against Microsoft and anybody else in our space, it's really when you look at our portfolio of products and solutions. And people keep telling me, Dave, I didn't know how much stuff you guys had, whether it's customers, whether it's partners, whether it's folks that just recently joined VMware that get exposed to our total portfolio of products and solutions. It's pretty comprehensive. So again, you think about this. You think about positioning the impact of all of our solutions for a customer, that provide that investment protection. So what does it mean to invest in, say, vSphere, right? And vSphere is the foundation to giving customers access to a lot of these technologies, like storage virtualization with vSAN, network virtualization, which to me was the biggest question I got from folks at VMworld this year, whether that stopped by the VMworld or in my presentations. They're getting it. NSX, network virtualization, is really a great next big thing for customers to understand, because it's so high impact and so seamlessly integrated with the VM. But you've got Horizon, a whole suite of products for virtual desktops and apps and UC, and kind of blurring the line between physical and virtual on the endpoint side. You've got vCloud Air and vCloud Air DR. You've got EvoRail for a hyper-converged SDDC appliance. You've got AirWatch, enterprise mobility management, even security aspects. So the more you explain to customers, VMware, yes, we got to start in vSphere, but we have expanded our capabilities based on the needs of customers, and we want you to understand we can solve so many more of your challenges. And I think that's where coming in and saying, let's roadmap this portfolio of products. Let's make sure I understand your challenges, but the more you explain to customers that you have the ability to solve the next challenge they have and the next and the next and the next, that's a huge differentiator against Microsoft that really is somewhat focused on either the app side or that hypervisor side without some of the flexibility of storage and network virtualization and mobile device management and EUC to the level we have. When you look at all these things as they come together, there's really nobody in our space that offers such a comprehensive and complete portfolio of solutions. So again, if anybody tries to disparage, hey, it's just a hypervisor, no, that hypervisor gives you access to all these other technologies, and that's the value here. And one of the things I like to do is actually I just grab a screen grab of our products page on our website every now and then because it reinforces everything we do. So asking folks, or even asking folks in your organization, hey, have you seen the products tab on VMware site lately? Because there's a lot to it, right? Because there's vSphere. vSphere is still there. But I kind of call this the choose your own adventure of IT these days because there are so many pieces that you can put in front of your customers to solve these challenges. It's a great conversation. And if you don't want to do it this way, I still like this slide, the whole how everything stacks up where you've got the software-defined data center at the bottom, the hybrid cloud, and the end-user workspace. Because one easy thing you can do is, show customers, hey, here's how the products align to it. You've got your vSphere and vSAN NSX and operations management with vCenter, but you can show them, hey, there are VMware solutions around all of these aspects of your IT need. And this is a great way to have them understand the progression of products and solutions around this. And for you guys as partners, the services opportunities around this to me are phenomenal. Whether it's, the implementation stuff I know is starting to become a little bit, I'll say, less significant than it used to be. But think about how you position yourself as a consultant, the partner that can come in and help your customers understand how to put the plan together and align the products to the solution, reduce the risks of deploying them. There's great partner services dollars around all of these solutions and technologies, whether it's just knowing them or helping your customers put a plan together. There's value in that. So I hope you guys are positioning yourselves as that value-added consultant. And I do a lot of presentation on consulting, so I encourage you guys, check those out, grab some resources, because I think there's a great benefit to you to really place yourself in that consulting role. And then the last slide around this, I think I want to reinforce, if you haven't seen this yet, I know this has been in some of our keynotes the last couple, VMworld Partner Exchange sessions, but we call this the VMware architecture for IT. This is another great way to reinforce the VMware vision at a high level to your customers. This idea that you've got this one cloud, any application, any device capability is pretty significant when you think about that, right? It's not just a pretty marketing slide, but it's the idea that you've got this unified hybrid cloud, which is whether it's private, managed, or public, with the software-defined data center driving it, where customers can build their own, buy it converged, buy it hyper-converged. There's choice abound here, but there's a foundational aspect to this that they can deploy the way they want with your help, that they can run any app, whether traditional or modern, and access it from any device, really anywhere. So the flexibility conversation's there, but it's not necessarily a one-way street. There's flexibility both ways. And you're going to start to see today where this really starts to stand out when you understand what Microsoft might be messaging here for a lot of our customers. And I'll get to that comparison in a little bit. But mastering this stuff on a high level, great stuff to lay in front of a new audience that you can up-level your conversations around. So some high-level stuff. I'll get into a couple of things a little more specific because these are the kind of things that often come up. When it comes to managing the infrastructure, we use vCenter, right? vCenter has been our foundation for, as long as I can remember, right? When it comes to Microsoft, especially with Hyper-V and all the Azure on-prem stuff, you're really digging through at least 8 different interfaces, driven through System Center with PowerShell. This is where we start to see a difference because the single cohesive layer of management just doesn't exist with Hyper-V. Beyond just having to configure things outside of the VM, to configure the infrastructure to support these virtual machines that start on-prem or have to eventually move to, say, in their case, Azure, You have to dig through things like Virtual Machine Manager, Failover Cluster Manager, Disk Manager, Hyper-V Manager, the Network Control Panel admin. You have to deal with NIC teaming. You have to deal with Data Protection Manager and Orchestrator. But the challenge with a lot of these, I'll say, management interfaces is they've been around forever. A lot of these infrastructure pieces have been around from the days of the physical-only infrastructure. So they've been retrofitted to handle virtualization. But it becomes clear when you talk to Hyper-V admins that they're not looking at a single control plane. They're not looking at that single point of management. So there's a lot of complexities to deal with. Another point of complexity is just looking at the integration points and then the databases. There's a lot of complexity to deal with when it comes to not only managing System Center, but getting it set up. You know, when I was with my partner, we used to do Microsoft. We used to do System Center. And I had a love-hate relationship with System Center projects because they were always big services deals. There was lots of budget for services in that deal because it was a big, complex implementation. But, man, it was risky. I never felt like we had enough time to get it all done exactly right because things would always come up. The integration points would be problematic. Getting all the interfaces set up and getting everything configured was tricky. So for me, it was probably the riskiest project I could attack because of how complex and how difficult these implementations were. So not only that, leaving your customers with that is very, very difficult. When you bring it back to vCenter, remind your customers, vCenter is as easy to set up as you can. You know, you've got the database behind it, you get it set up, and it pretty much just works. There aren't all these other points of integration to deal with. And then once it's set up, I hope you guys are positioning the value of the vRealize operations management aspects, right? That, you know, System Center is very much focused on here's what has happened, here's some historical, here are some, you know, current, you know, states of the infrastructure. But what does that mean? So many of my customers I talk to, I ask, how's your infrastructure going? Well, it's good, I think. Well, how do you know? You know, that's where this comes in. The whole idea that you've got an operations management layer with our products that say, hey, I'm going to tell you what's going on today. I'm going to guide you. I love the guidance aspects. I'm going to guide you on how to address things, how to solve that, right? I'm going to mark it red and let you dig into it if something's not right, which is unique for your environment. So I'm going to look at your environment and tell you what's normal and what's unique based on your environment. Or I love this, where this starts to stand apart from, say, System Center, is what it looks at to predict the future. I am going to identify risks and areas of efficiency that you can address down the road before they become a problem. This is what makes your customers better at what they do when it comes to managing the infrastructure, because you've got a very forward-thinking management layer that's going to always be looking and guiding you on how to make it better. And so some data I've seen from, we do a lot of surveying of our customers. Two of the data points I loved about our layer of management compared to all the others is the average VM admin can manage 60% more VMs when they have vSOM because of that proactive guidance and efficiency and right sizing. And then 78% of customers have told me they're seeing a full ROI of adding operations management within that first 90 days because it's so efficient in saying, hey, reclaim this waste. I'm going to guide you so you don't have downtime or less downtime, that you don't have issues with resources being consumed faster than you think. I'm going to give you a heads up. This is the kind of thing that starts to stand apart when you think about investing in an infrastructure and then keeping it running at efficient levels. So again, great data points, a couple of things to highlight with your conversations. Point number 4, the thing I probably run into so much is, well, Hyper-V is free. Why don't I just want to deploy that? Well, there's a couple of points I'm going to make today. The last point, number 10, is probably the biggest gotcha, but I'm going to tee a couple of things up before we get there. You know, for me, the real-world deployment costs and, you know, total cost of ownership from that free Hyper-V product don't always include things like System Center and support costs. So when both customers add those in, the costs start to increase, right? There are studies that show VMware has up to 90% lower OpEx, operating expenses, than Microsoft. There are public case studies out there. So, you know, the idea is, well, you know, free to start doesn't turn into free long term. So make sure, again, get your customers thinking, what is the impact of this over the next 2 to 3 to 5 years of this decision? Because I put my customer hat back on. When I made a decision as a CIO to make a purchase, I generally had to live with that purchase for 2, 3, sometimes 5 years because I didn't have room in my budget to go back and revisit that purchase. So understanding that your customers have to assess the risk of making a decision and try to predict what the long-term cost of that decision looks like is absolutely the talk track here. Make sure your customers understand free is that short-term get you in the door because the long-term costs start to add up very quickly with Hyper-V. And I'll show you a quick way to do that, right? Understanding total cost of ownership, which is a mix of CapEx and OpEx expenses, right? Capital expenses include, the guest OS for the VM, the virtualization software, the hardware, the management, the real estate, any third-party software, the expenses that your customers have to purchase to get it up and running. But then they also have the support, the human capital, the platforms, any migration costs, the keep it running costs. The problem I keep seeing from most Microsoft messaging is Microsoft comparisons generally only consider the software license costs. They try to keep the conversation around that. And you might think, well, why does Microsoft do that? It should be pretty obvious because the real-world total cost of this Microsoft solution is far more expensive and time-consuming than a VMware-based solution when you factor in the total cost of ownership, when you factor in the reality of what will this cost me over the 3 to 5 years of deploying a Microsoft-based solution. This is where we generally win head-to-head, and I'll show you, if you don't know what tool to use, I'll show you a tool in a second that can prove that out for you. But this is a great conversation to address head-on. What Microsoft will try to do short-term is this credits. They'll try to offer lots of credits, whether it's trying to position that free hypervisor, which you get a sense that you can negate over the long-term TCO discussion. But they'll try to get people to commit short-term by saying, we're going to give you some free Azure credits. They do that a lot during EA renewals. So again, remind your customers the long-term cost implications of this Microsoft infrastructure. What happens when those credits run out? Your bill is going to skyrocket. Those credits are to get your focus to be short-term and make the decision today, and then they'll get you on their platform, and those costs will start to go up. So again, remind your customers, what does this look for you in 3 to 5 years, or however long this needs to last for you? Some might say, I don't know. Well, it's 3 years, a fair estimate. Are you going to revisit this in 3 years? Well, I don't know. Probably not. Get them thinking what it means to live with this for 3 to 5 years, and they'll start to think about the risks of why are they offering me free credits? What's the gotcha going to be in, say, year 2 or 3? So one of the easiest ways to do this is using our TCO calculator. If you go to vmware.com/go/TCO calculator, you can kind of walk through a fairly typical comparison based on, I think, 8 quick inputs for your customers. It's a great way to start this conversation and expose the total cost of ownership differences of VMware versus Microsoft. There's other ways to do this, but again, if we're kind of starting high level here, this is a great way to say, hey, I can tackle this head on. This free hypervisor doesn't turn out to be free for you very long term, and I'll explain to you why. But keep this in mind as I get through the rest of these, because point number 10 is usually the deal killer when it comes to Hyper-V versus our solution. So I'll get to that in a second. But the other big question, I'll just build this out too, is when it comes to the approach to cloud, we understand Microsoft is very strong in positioning their cloud message these days. You can't get away from it. It's everywhere, right? I'm watching football. I see it. I'm watching Walking Dead. I see it. The commercials are everywhere. When you travel, you see them. But the whole idea is when it comes to, I think, the value proposition you've heard from me about that unified hybrid cloud, right? The ability to have workloads on both ends, on-prem and the cloud, and then having to move them back and forth where you want, or even moving in one way, becomes a little bit more painful when you get into the intricacies of a Microsoft-based solution, because moving from on-prem to Azure is not so easy when it comes to VMware, right? Understand, the VMware customers run on-prem, and the VMware vSphere and everything else running in our cloud, it's the same. It's the same platform, which means there's no VM conversion necessary to get a VM from on-prem up to our cloud or even back. And all those networking and security and storage rules that you created, those are going to follow that VM when you move it over to the cloud. That's a very unique capability when it comes to comparing it to a Microsoft solution. A Hyper-V-based VM has to be configured and changed when you move it to the cloud, when you move it to Azure. You have to address things like networking and storage and HA rules, and there's live migration challenges. And then they have this Gen 1 versus Gen 2 VM version conversation that you have to have before a workload can be moved to Azure. And I'll cover that Gen 1 thing in a second. But you're getting a sense it's not the seamless migration, the seamless movement of workloads like our story tells. And when it comes to Azure, remember, Azure still runs on Windows. We've got test workloads, we've got customers that do this, and they always send me things like this. This is a notice from Azure that they get every now and then. Hey, your cloud workload, yeah, we're going to be rebooting that at some point this weekend. It shouldn't be down long, maybe 30, 45 minutes, but your cloud workload might be unavailable because we're rebooting stuff. We're maintaining things. So this is still that the foundation for Azure is Windows-based, which if you haven't seen our vSphere and our Windows Server and our Hyper-V comparisons on that level, you understand the number of patches, the workloads that are affected because it runs on Windows is still here when it comes to Azure. And one of my favorite quotes from customers was, well, I thought the cloud didn't require reboots. Well, that's the difference here, right? You have to understand some of the intricacies and the risks of certain platforms. When it comes to our approach, again, bringing it back to VMware, this is the significant aspect, because when we designed our vCloud, vCloud Air, approach to hybrid, we built in features like high availability. So if anything happened to a workload, HA kicks in automatically, and those VMs are protected. So whether it's new or existing apps, you've got that seamless networking, you've got common management, and one of my favorite things, one of the things customers tell me is one of their favorite things about a unified hybrid cloud approach is one support call. So whether I have VMs on-prem or in the cloud, I can call the same support team, and they can help me. So there's no tricky phone support, tricky call trees, tricky callback support. All of that can be done through that one support call. And I'll let you guys know, in the surveys, in the customer advocacy teams that survey our customers, our support team is one of our highest rated customer satisfaction areas. This is a great value to put in front of your customers to say, no matter what happens to your workloads, the support team can handle it. And again, remind them, because it's that same platform. When it comes to Microsoft, I just want to reinforce we hear the same thing from Microsoft, right? Microsoft's approach to hybrid cloud is, oh yeah, on-prem Azure, yeah, it's the same. We do the same things too, right? The existing apps, the networking management support, it's all there. The problem, like I've told you, is the changes, whether it's the limited number of operating systems supported, the inconsistent support. There is not that single point of support here. There are different support teams to handle the different sides of it. I already told you guys, you have to redesign a lot of the apps resiliency, the HA rules, the security policies, some of the network capabilities managed outside of VM require separate settings when it comes to moving it to Hyper-V, from Hyper-V over to Azure. There's very limited policy-based automation, and that really is the intelligence that can sit at the VM level that will do things based on either where the VM is or what happened. And that's when it comes into like storage virtualization and network virtualization. This is where that automation is killer for us, because it handles situations based on the VM, but not based on where it is, just based on what it needs. And this is a great thing to get into with your customers as we start to look at more policy-based automation. And then, like I said, this Gen 1 versus Gen 2 VM incompatibility. This is probably one of the bigger questions that come up when your Hyper-V customer has to consider what they're going to do with that VM. And really, it starts to speak to the complexity of these platforms that, well, if you want to use a 32 or 64-bit VM, there's different VM versions. If you want portability, well, Gen 1 VMs can do it, but Gen 2 might give you some other features. So there's a little confusion about which is the best Gen VM version to use in Hyper-V. And the problem is I haven't seen an easy way to convert between Gen 1 and Gen 2 VMs. There isn't necessarily a supported tool right now that I'm aware of that makes this conversion easy. So you're kind of trying to force customers to choose a platform based on unknowns. And so this is, again, is a big difference, because there's none of this you have to do with our approach. Because migrating a VM to vCloud Air really is easy, because you can go into your vSphere vCenter interface, and actually you can move it and promote it to vCloud Air right from here. Again, this reinforces how easy it is because there's no conversion necessary. So a big deal, right? This is a major difference when it comes to seamlessly moving workloads back and forth. But when you think about what's going on from Microsoft, maybe this is telling me something. So we get to go to competitors' conferences. It's sometimes fun, sometimes awkward. I always tell my leadership, don't worry, I won't get arrested. I enjoy this stuff. But one of the best quotes I saw from Ignite this year, which is the big Microsoft conference, was he said, Hyper-V was barely mentioned all day when he was there. Microsoft really appears to be dismissing virtualization It's just a stepping stone to the cloud, is what he said. I think that was a profound statement, because you think about this, the messaging from Microsoft, you're right, it's not so much focused on on-prem. And studies I still see 80 to 85% of workloads still reside on-prem. So customers might be exploring cloud, and I feel like everyone should. We should be positioning that there's a flexible future. But Microsoft says, you know what, everything should be cloud. It's a cloud-first mentality these days. Well, hold on now. Just because you're making that statement doesn't mean everyone needs to accept that. Because you think about this, there's a major difference in philosophies here, and I kind of equate it to a donut story. Because, okay, I like to make things fun. And you think about it this way, right? Microsoft says, well, everything Azure-based, right? Apps should be there, your VMs should be there, your infrastructure should be there. You should consider basically cloud first. Well, what about, the hypervisor and virtualization? It doesn't matter. Well, wait a second, because I've got a major investment on-prem here in virtualization and infrastructure that now you're saying is just a commodity, it doesn't matter? Hold on a second. So you think about this, I don't like being forced down a path. And I think that's where most of the customers I've talked to say, this is what really worries me. And then partners are also worried about the more cloud-focused Microsoft becomes, where do I fit in? And that's a whole other conversation we get into. But you think about this. You think about going to a bakery. You go to a bakery and they have all the stuff. I like chocolate-covered donuts. I like, a cream-filled donut. I'd like to get a chocolate-filled donut, or a couple of those. Well, hold on, customer. The standard now is jelly-filled. Pretty much, you should buy jelly-filled donuts. Well, I don't think maybe I'll have one, but I don't want a dozen jelly-filled donuts. I want some chocolate and some other ones, and I want to be able to put them in a box and take them with me and eat them when I want. So the idea is that if I went to a bakery and they said, well, you need to buy jelly-filled donuts, I'd probably pick another bakery. I'd probably go somewhere else that says, what do you want? I can give you 12 donuts. I can give you as many as you want. I'll put them in a box, give you choice and flexibility, and let you take them with them. It'd be a very weird bakery, the conversation when you think about it. But that's the idea. That's kind of the silly aspect that everything suddenly is cloud first. I think the reality is I want to pick my donut. I want to choose whether I want to eat it here or take it with me. I want to choose where I take that donut, and I want choice in how I want to, which donut I want. That really comes back to the VMware story here of a unified hybrid cloud. Whether on-prem or cloud, customers can do what they want. They're prepared for the future, reinforcing that the software-defined data center, which is the foundation for this, will never be obsolete. So whether they're ready to move to cloud today or in a year or 2 years, the flexibility will be there, the path will be there, the options will be there, and that really is a strong differentiator for us. I'm going to take a quick drink. Mike, any questions? Because I still feel like I'm going quite fast. I know we've got about 25 or so minutes left. How are we doing? Questions?
We don't have any questions. It looks good. The flow is good.
Okay.
I wanted to jump in, but you had so much coffee this morning. With your donut story, you're filled on it.
What's on your mind, Mike?
No, I was, back in when I'm talking to customers or to partners, basically, I kind of lead with, what does the customer's vision of the solution looks like?
Right.
And from that deployment of SDDC, I'll focus on one of the solution, one of the power plays to address his issue, match it to the vision of his solution, and then start bringing in the other components that actually leads him to a complete independent, so a complete SDDC story.
Yeah.
And that's been so successful. By the way, I got a message, whoa, this is very wonderful presentation with lots of eye-catching slides. I'm glad you like it. And we're going to have this presentation available for you in a PowerPoint so you can actually leverage some of this yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, my Photoshop skills are on full display, I guess. So I agree. I think it needs to look pretty. And I'll let you know, a lot of these slides are in those infographics, and I've created a customer-facing version of these too for you guys. So if you haven't gone to the competitive page on Partner Central, grab stuff like this there. Absolutely, because I think when you tell a story, if it doesn't look polished, it just feels a little weird. I get you. So absolutely. And Mike, I think there's something that as a partner, and I'm very sensitive to the needs of partners, especially when it comes to compete, We've got a new channel chief, right, for partners, Ross Brown. And Ross Brown's making a lot of rounds, and he's very capable. He comes from the space. He actually worked at some of our competition. He understands the way this works. So from a partner perspective, guys, I encourage you, invest in this, because from what I've talked to Ross Brown about, he's investing back in partners. The impact of what you can do to succeed with VMware is going to change and improve. The ability to have what he calls a predictable approach to selling VMware is coming, and it's going to, I'll say, trounce anything we've done before and improve your benefit to positioning VMware more than you've ever seen before. So keep your eyes open, because beyond everything else, our ability to support what you guys need to be successful as partners is going to continue to grow too. So I'm very excited about that. I want to jump in to go through a couple more things before we run out of time, and then let's go through questions at the end or anything else that comes up. But if anything comes up in the interim, yeah, jump in. So I don't want to go too deep, but I want to remind you, vSphere 6, when it comes to innovation, what we've done with vSphere continues to be advantageous for us, because there are so many capabilities and features that you look at them all together, look at compute and management, storage and networking, how they come together. They provide a wealth of capabilities that Microsoft just doesn't have. And one of the easiest ways to do this, and I caution you guys getting into the checkbox speeds and feeds discussions, but if you do, there's another great resource about the vSphere 6 advantages over Hyper-V. It's a really easily digestible, checkbox type comparison that I've created. That's on our partner compete page too. That helps you distinguish the features I think that have the most impact. Because most of our competition likes to do this line-by-line feature comparison. Of course, everybody highlights their advantages. But think about, hey, what are the features and capabilities that matter most for you as a customer? And these are the things I try to highlight in these documents. And when it comes to innovation that drives customer success, vSphere 6 is probably one of the best releases we had that shows that there are features that we've innovated to release that, again, Microsoft doesn't even have on their platform. Whether it's long-distance vMotion, which is now actually 150 milliseconds. So I can vMotion between two separate data centers. Not replicate, vMotion, basically on the fly moving a VM. I've got fault tolerance that now supports up to 4 vCPUs. Fault tolerance to me is, if you don't know it, right, it's an in-memory copy of a VM running on two different hosts. We've got HA, which will reboot the VM if something happens to a server, but fault tolerance says this is a mission-critical workload. If anything happens, I need instant failover of that VM. And this is what fault tolerance does. So if anything happens, it's immediately available. This is a feature that Microsoft doesn't have. This is a big difference for customers running very important workloads in our platform. Virtual volumes, that really changes the way VMs can interact with storage, and content library. And the ability to scale. Microsoft likes to talk about scale, and I call these hero numbers because I'll say most customers will never be anywhere near the scale of these types of scenarios when it comes to individual workloads or host size. But, hosts up to 480 CPUs, 12 terabytes of RAM, VMs up to 128 vCPUs and 4 terabytes of RAM. Those all trump the Microsoft numbers that we see. I'd love a deal that was that big, but this is often what Microsoft will do in things like RFPs to say, hey, customers may need VMs and hosts this large, and we can absolutely compete with that. So now you can turn this around on Microsoft to say, hey, with vSphere 6, we can support significantly larger deployments of a virtual environment. And these are the things that help you when you start to, compete effectively, proactively in these scenarios. So just knowing some of those numbers will help. Let me get into 7. So looking at the platform real quick, speaking of numbers and size, I hope you guys know, and I've been doing this for years, saying, remind customers, if you're looking at vSphere versus Hyper-V, vSphere was a purpose-built hypervisor. It doesn't require an operating system, whereas Hyper-V requires the installation of Windows Server 2012 in some regard. What I keep seeing is, Windows Server 2012, the smallest instance of Windows Server is Windows Server Core. And I know Windows Server Nano is coming out. I've got a deep dive that we're coming up about that because it's really not quite the same yet. So the typical production level deployment, it actually isn't even Windows Server Core these days. It's Windows Server 2012. So if you look at the size, right, vSphere 5.5 was about a 200 meg hypervisor. Windows Server 2012 Core, the smallest you can deploy with for Hyper-V, is about a 5 gig install. But as most customers said, well, most customers use the full install of Windows Server 2012 R2, which is kind of like the battleship in size next to the little dolphin size vSphere 5.5 hypervisor. When you look at the actual footprint of an install just to get a host running that hypervisor. Major difference there. I'm a very visual person, so I like this, and I think it's kind of funny to think about it this way. But then vSphere 6 came out, right? And mind you, vSAN code, NSX code, all built into that hypervisor, so it had to have gotten bigger, right? Well, actually, vSphere 6 was a 158 meg hypervisor, so it actually got smaller. So you think about the difference in the design of the hypervisor architecture, this starts to stand out, because ask your customers, just think about which platform by design best reduces risk to your business. You want to have to deal with that general purpose operating system just to get the benefits of virtualization, or do you want this 158 meg purpose-built hypervisor that has none of this extra superfluous code that could be vulnerable to something down the road? This is a major difference in our architecture, right? Whether it's purpose-built or requires an operating system is a major difference. Because when you get to, think about what it means to bolt virtualization to that general purpose operating system, it increases risk. It increases complexity. It decreases reliability because you've got so much more to manage and so many other layers where something can go wrong. And we understand Microsoft has a pretty aggressive approach to patching. They now call it Update Tuesday. It's, I guess, different than Patch Tuesday. It's still the same thing. That, Update Tuesday rolls around, patches come out, whether related to virtualization or not, most customers running Hyper-V have to apply those patches to those Windows Server environment. So there are major patches that we track all the time that generally have an effect, which force customers to reboot their workloads. And if you do some research on Microsoft patches that have had bad effects, there's lots of that. So there's risks to that. And we've had some patches, but again, patching that that very specific hypervisor, a lot different than trying to patch everything around an operating system. And I did some use case scenario work with my lab team this summer, earlier, and I noticed something. We've got lab, we can deploy a lot of the competing products. We were setting up a bunch of Hyper-V, Windows Server instances, and I noticed my guys had to deploy 81 patches on Windows Server before we could use that thing for virtualization, about 2 gigs of patches. So you think about just getting it off the ground, there's already a major difference in the size and complexity of the architecture before you even get into virtualization. So again, these are the things that might help, paint a good picture. Because like I told you before, the approach to virtualization from Microsoft is somewhat human-dependent and manual outside of the hypervisor, right? The ability to have everything VM-centric lets you embrace policy-based automation, improve the speed of provisioning, require a little bit less manual separate configuration challenges, right? You think about the silos of work that if I have to have a network admin, a storage admin, maybe a security officer have to weigh in without necessarily having the understanding of the connection to the VM, to me is a major risk. And when it comes to especially vSphere 6, what we've done with storage and network virtualization, having direct exposure to the VM, makes all the difference in the world when you're trying to reduce the complexity of deploying these VMs for your customers, as well as where they're going to ultimately move those VMs. So again, make sure you get up to speed on what we call policy-based automation. It's basically saying, hey, I can react to a situation automatically because I understand the way the network works with my VM. I understand the connection to storage, and I can do things with that. I don't have to rely on separate layers of manual management to deal with the situation. I've kind of hammered that point a lot. I'm going to skip through these couple slides here because it's kind of the point. So here's the big thing. Here's what I'm seeing. And it gets a little deep, but the reality starts to hit home when we talk about this point. This is point number 10. So it might sound a little weird, but VM density and memory management, when you compare VMware and Microsoft, it's like apples and oranges. This is the real reason why we have better VM densities than Microsoft. So let me go into this real quick because, again, I assume that you've had conversations with your customers, you've explained the vision, you've explained some of the differences in our hybrid cloud and the cloud vision and the flexibility in the platforms, but then the reality starts to hit, what will this look like? If I go Hyper-V, what will this look like? Because most customers think, I've got these VMs running on these servers, I can just flip those servers to Hyper-V and off I go. but they're not taking into account that we generally, almost every head-to-head comparison I've seen, have better VM density than Microsoft. What does that mean? That's the number of VMs a customer can fit on a server when you compare ours to theirs. And I'll explain that to you in a second. It all comes from how we handle memory management. VMware has 4 memory management techniques that are all generally automatically available. We call it transparent page sharing, memory ballooning, memory compression, and memory swapping. I'm not going to go deep. I just want you to be aware of this because when you compare this, Microsoft has one approach to VM memory management. It's called dynamic memory. And it really is a very manual process. You have to set this up for every VM. You have to go into every VM and configure dynamic memory. All of those memory management techniques are generally automatically available on our site, all managed from a top level. So when it comes to dynamic memory, it's generally not reliable for production workloads, and I'll explain that in a second, which is why customers generally leave it off. I was at a big customer down in Atlanta the other day, and I believe they had 98% of their VMs that they had in their Hyper-V test environment did not have dynamic memory enabled, which means there's no memory sharing and overcommit on these Hyper-V workloads. So what does this mean? Because this wins deals. This is a big deal. So why is it important? Since I'm not able to share memory, I have to fully allocate the RAM for every VM I deploy in a Hyper-V environment, which means I have to buy more hardware and licensing to deploy the same number of VMs, and I'm going to have to manage more host and complexities because of that inferior VM density. This is where suddenly that free hypervisor becomes a lot more expensive because, I have to buy more Windows licensing. I have to buy more hardware. So the idea that, hey, if I just want to take my virtual environment and move it over to that free hypervisor, I'm going to have to buy a lot more stuff to deploy the same number of VMs. This is where, again, our better VM density and our efficient ability to manage memory and let our VMs share resources lets us fit more VMs on a host server. This is that biggest gotcha that customers encounter when they consider Microsoft. So a couple of things. What do you need to know about this? And don't worry about trying to keep up with this. I actually have a document that outlines this exactly like this and actually gives you steps on how to show this to your customers on that compete page on Partner Central. But what you need to know, again, most Microsoft and Hyper-V proponents advise only enable it for test dev environments when it comes to dynamic memory. This is why less than 10% of these Hyper-V VMs use this feature. It's disabled by default, and again, must be configured on a per VM basis. I counted 7 steps to configure it per VM, plus maintenance, no top-level management and visibility into that. It can cause severe performance issues and instability if it's configured or managed incorrectly. And then it's only compatible with select applications or operating systems and requires certain service packs. Again, by default, since it's disabled, every VM that your customers create on Hyper-V does a full memory reservation, which means, if I have a 32 gig VM that I've assigned 32 gigs to a VM, but that VM only uses about 12. With our approach to virtualization, that 20 gigs of remaining RAM that's really not used by the VM will be shared back with the host, which lets other VMs use that even though I've, quote, allocated it to a VM. This is where that memory management comes in because with Hyper-V, if I allocate 32 gigs of RAM, it says, nope, that 32 gigs of RAM is reserved for that VM. Nothing can share it. No matter if that VM uses 2 or 8 or 24, it's going to hold that RAM to that VM. This is where we get massive differences in VM density. So I ran an example here, and this was a fairly reasonable example that showed we get a 250% VM density advantage. So in a scenario like this, right? This is where it starts to add up for customers. So if you think about this in that scenario, and again, this is the stuff that's in this infographic document. I'll show you in the next slide. But in this scenario, the Hyper-V customer would have to purchase and manage 3 times the number of servers for the same number of VMs. Think about all the unnecessary CapEx and space and complexity for that, quote, comparable solution. This is generally why the Hyper-V conversation falls apart. This is why that free hypervisor becomes a lot more expensive because you're having to buy more stuff and deal with more complexity just to get the same thing. So when this comes up, I show them this, and I ask them, how are you explaining this then to your executive people? How do you explain this line of business? So I'm going to go through all this. I'm going to spend the time to convert these VMs to Hyper-V, and basically the infrastructure, all behind it's changed, and as the kind of a sample example, I changed out all the plumbing and the toilet still flushed the same way. What's the value to the business? Because I had to take more time. And I had to buy more stuff and incur more licensing costs. this is where the TCO falls apart in a lot of these comparisons. So I don't want to talk too much about this. Go to the competitive selling page on Partner Central, VMware.com/go/partner-compete. Grab this VM density infographics. There's a customer version and a version for you that you can actually walk your customers through. I've got more examples, and I've got a way for you to prove it. If they have vCenter, if they have System Center, there's a way to show this to your customers and show the impact, and this generally shows beautifully to our advantage that we talk about here. This is, like I said, this is what wins deals. So time check, almost out of time. So I've shown you this. I've redesigned Partner Central, the competitive page, because it better aligns to, I think, what you guys need to do these days and what you need to know. On this page, there's lots of information. I encourage you, keep a check on the competitive VM Live sessions. We generally do these once every week or every 2 weeks for sure across all of our categories. If there's a competitive session you want, just let us know, because I can put something together for you guys, across our portfolio of products. But bookmark the Partner Compete page, because you've got assets by solution, assets by competitor. I try to maintain as current a list of upcoming VM Lives as I can. We've got the TCO comparison calculator. Everything you need to know, hopefully from a competitive standpoint, you can find here. And I try to even give you guidance at the top of the page on what you should know right now or what's new and hot, so you can stay on top of information. This is the stuff I understand to help you win deals. If something's missing, let me know. Let us know, and we'll work to get it there for you, because I think you're getting a sense. We compete in so many areas, but we also have so much competition against us, right? New competitive areas that are popping up, day by day based on the new technologies we have. I understand the sale can be challenging, but we can win these deals. These deals are absolutely, aligned to our ability to compete from a unified hybrid cloud and that great portfolio of products and solutions we have. So understanding that will often help you get past some of the objections that might be more individual product or feature focused. I'm going to take a pause. I've covered a lot. I hope you got some value out of this, because there is so much to talk about. We probably could have done this for 3 hours and I put everybody to sleep, but the whole idea is there's lots of things out there. Questions? Any changes? Anything that I didn't cover that in the next 5 minutes, people have questions about?
There is a question for you on the Q&A window, which I now lost because you stopped sharing. Let me go back and look at it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
When it comes to OS licensing, customers say Windows Server, I think he meant the Data Center Edition, right, gives us unlimited licenses for free. How would you respond to this? I know we talked about the drag and, more licenses, yeah, but then you need more infrastructure and so on. Right. But customers don't think about it that way. What's in their face is the free components. And, for years we've been fighting this free hypervisor and so on.
Well, so I think you've learned a few things today, I hope, right? So yes, Windows Server Data Center Edition lets customers deploy an unlimited number of VMs on that host. But remember, it's more than just the Windows Server licensing. Getting into System Center, getting into the support costs, which often aren't included, getting into the other features, especially looking at what we can do with some of our surrounding technologies that don't even exist on that platform. Also, looking at that VM density discussion, the reality is they're not going to be able to deploy the same number of VMs on the same number of hosts when it comes to our approach to virtualization, and then getting into the complexities of moving workloads. So cost is one metric. I know cost comes up first because Microsoft says, well, it's free, you should use that. But I hope you're getting a sense of how you can debunk that, right?
Right. And James jumped in actually to expand on this, and he talks that this is impacting even the vMotion and DRS when the system is automated and moving things, and Microsoft's coming back and say, wait a minute, if you're vMotioning this to this, it needs a license and so on. I know we can put limitation in the vMotion to direct it to, servers that has licenses and so on, so then we won't fall into that trap that, hey, we're motioning it to everywhere. No, we're motioning it to machines that has licenses. But that's not just an excuse. We need to, maybe you should just do a write-up or something in the competitive on how to address the licensing part? I know in the past we did something and we gave them a paper about it. Maybe we should just revisit this and update it and so on.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we can absolutely do that. But remind your customers to think about the total cost, that reality of what does this look like 2 or 3 years down the road when there's no credits anymore and you're paying for all the support. You have to, fully deploy System Center. Hopefully by then they've got it done. But the reality is, that's where the costs start to add up. So, Microsoft. I respect Microsoft. I do. That's a smart company. It's amazing how much money they can make on a free product. I did an analysis for our executives about how does Microsoft make money on that free hypervisor. And I'll tell you what, they make more money in 3 to 5 years on that free hypervisor than we do on our paid hypervisor. So the reality adds up really quick when these other derivative costs comes in, the densities come in, and the tools required to manage those come in. So, get customers understanding the long-term TCO. The TCO calculator helps, but the reality is these decisions that customers make are never generally short-term. I have to make this decision today, and I'm going to live with it for a few years. Remind them what that looks like. Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. 2 points. We need more on the Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization competition.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the other question came in from Joseph isn't vRealize 4 to 8 times more expensive than System Center? We have options, a different suite in vRealize, and sometimes you might start, competing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. So
that's the problem. Right?
Yeah.
That's the challenge, right? So it's getting into policy-based automation, the efficiency aspects. Looking at vRealize, there's a suite of products that do various things. If you look at System Center doesn't provide a lot of that, which forces customers into what I call third-party software. And so now if you're trying to match feature for feature, it can be somewhat different. Because, Mike, you're right, it is apples to oranges. But when it comes to core virtualization, no matter what, most customers have to deploy System Center to get any level of automation. And I want to remind you, their approach to virtualization, there isn't that great top-level visibility that we have with vCenter. Because of that, we can layer things like vRealize on there. vRealize is powerful when it comes to making folks better at what they do. But when it comes to System Center, you don't manage top-level resources. You don't manage things like RAM and CPU from a pool standpoint. We show a pool of resources that customers can carve out for their VMs. That doesn't happen with System Center. It doesn't work that way. So again, it forces a more per VM, individual type approach to managing these workloads.
Yeah,
I don't know any customer that wants to do it that way.
Right. It's a great point Joseph brought up, in terms of the positioning vRealize with the System Center. Starting with vSOM, which is a little bit way cheaper, and it does enough automation and enough management to start you with at a hypervisor level, and then take them up as there is a need, understand your customer's need and so on. But, guys, I do have to start on a second VM Live I have at 9. How to amplify your marketing to accelerate time to revenue. I'd love for you to join us if you can. If not, I want to thank you for joining. This presentation will be available on Partner Central, Partner University, under the VM Live Events tab. You can also find the previous sessions that we have with David. I want to thank you all for joining, and as always, go out, kick some butt, have some fun, sell more VMs. And with this, I want to thank David for presenting today. Thanks, guys, and I'll talk to you later. Bye, David.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.